The flute of champagne trembled slightly in my fingers, not from nerves, but from how loud the room had gotten. Glasses clinked. Someone near the back shouted, "To the man of the hour!" Everyone turned toward Evan, standing tall, smiling that quiet smile of his. Always so composed, always so unreadable. His hand brushed mine as I stepped beside him for the toast. I waited until the final laugh faded. Then, just as the microphone passed from one colleague to another, I slid the manila envelope into his palm. Smooth, quiet, a calculated movement dressed as affection. "You're free now," I said, smiling for the cameras. His coworkers assumed it was a retirement card. They didn't see the corners of his mouth freeze for half a second before he caught himself. He opened the envelope, pulled out the papers. No hesitation, no shock, just a single, slow breath. He didn't even look at me, just signed and handed it back like it was a dry cleaning receipt. Then he leaned in, his voice low and calm as always. "Perfect." Our daughter stood just behind me and whispered, "Finally." Our son didn't say a word, but his smirk was a clear enough endorsement. Evan tucked the pen into his jacket pocket and turned to greet another guest, as if none of it mattered, as if a 31-year marriage had been a polite business transaction. If you're still listening and any of this feels uncomfortably familiar, hit like and subscribe. Most people just listen in silence, but that one click tells the team these stories matter. I stood there, frozen in the middle of a room full of people who thought I'd just pulled the bravest move of my life. And maybe I had. I'd waited long enough. Through years of his emotional distance, his silent routines, his quiet control. I wanted something new, something real. I'd told myself that for months. The day he announced his retirement, I saw my window open. He had always been the provider, the planner, the one everyone relied on. But lately, I'd watched him shrink into a quiet shell of himself. Or so I thought. He started gardening, painting, even cooking again. That homemade fig tart at Thanksgiving? It made my mother cry. Everyone said, "He's really found peace," I thought. "He's just lost purpose." That night, after the guests thinned out and the lights dimmed, he stayed behind. He didn't come home. I figured he'd sleep at the lake house. I didn't text, didn't call. This was the new era. He wanted stillness. He had it. The next morning, my son messaged, "Is Dad okay?" I asked why. He posted a picture of the house key on a cutting board. Caption said, "Nothing heavy left to carry." I stared at it, trying to read between the lines, but Evan was always the master of implication, the kind of man who could break your heart and leave no fingerprints. I expected the next few days to be filled with legal calls, emails, frantic logistics. But instead, silence. No angry voicemails, no dramatic pleas, just a confirmation from his lawyer. "We acknowledge receipt. Mr. Danner will not contest. Please direct further communication to this office." That's when the dread started to bloom, because Evan didn't flinch. And Evan always flinched when our kids disappointed us, when my father insulted him, when the business went through lean months. Though he always showed his cards, even just a sliver. But now, nothing, which meant only one thing: he'd seen this coming. And suddenly, I wasn't so sure who had just made the bold move, and who had been waiting patiently for me to hand him the detonator. The house was still. Not silent, just still. The way a forest feels after snowfall. I sat out in the garden, where the citronella candle still sputtered from earlier, sending a thin ribbon of smoke upward. The champagne flutes were still on the patio table, 2 of them rimmed in lipstick, one cracked near the stem. Inside, the kitchen light hummed. I could hear the old grandfather clock ticking just beyond the sliding door. I didn't drink, I didn't cry, I just sat, breathed, let the air settle in my lungs like something earned. People thought I'd be devastated, that after 3 decades of playing husband, father, provider, I'd collapse once the title was gone. But that's the thing, titles mean nothing if you already know the play is over. She thought she'd caught me off balance. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was how long I'd been preparing for her to do exactly this. A year ago, maybe more, I'd started shifting things, quietly, methodically. Conversations about consolidation, simplifying, less house, more life, all rehearsed, all strategic. I let her think I was nostalgic, weak, trying to cling to the life we'd built. I let her think she had time. That anniversary trip in January, the one she bragged about to her friends as the last spark before the end, I'd booked it solely to get her signature on two key documents, a trust amendment and a prenuptial update she never read. She was too busy photographing the resort's infinity pool. I had revised the deed to the lake house by spring, moved most of the investment assets into separate holding structures by June. By July, the company pension had quietly shifted to a veteran-owned small business trust, legally shielded, all of it layered, all of it documented, all of it invisible to someone looking for trophies, not traps. And she had been looking for trophies. She saw my retirement as the finish line of a life she'd outgrown. I saw it as an opening, the first clean breath of a new playbook. I remember when I first started noticing her withdraw. The change wasn't loud. It never is. It was in how her laugh changed, not colder, just curated, less spontaneous, more performative. She started spending more time mentoring some nonprofit board executive, late events, conference weekends. Her phone tilted away when I entered a room, passwords on devices that used to lie open on the nightstand, but I never asked, not directly. That's what made her so confident. To her, my silence meant I hadn't caught on. In reality, it meant I didn't need to anymore. I'd already crossed the emotional border from need to neutrality, from fear to focus. The storm she thought she unleashed with those papers wasn't a storm at all. It was smoke, a distraction. I'd already rebuilt the foundation underneath her feet, moved the walls, redrew the blueprints, and when she smiled and handed me those documents in front of that crowd, she thought she was detonating my life. But I'd spent a year replacing every wire in the house. What she triggered was empty. That night in the garden, I lit the last of the citronella and watched it burn. My phone buzzed once, my attorney, just confirming the timestamp of my signature. I texted back, filed and noted, no need for contact. Then I turned off my phone, leaned back in the chair she used to love, and looked up at the sky. Clean, cold, unforgiving, and for the first time in 31 years, mine. She called the next morning, all sugar and steel. "We should talk through the logistics," Deanna said. Her voice clipped like she was reading off a checklist. "Car titles, utilities, forwarding addresses. I assume you'll be staying at the lake house?" I let the silence stretch. Then, "Please send all communications through my attorney." A pause. Not long, but sharp. "Oh, we're doing it that way." "We are?" Click. By Tuesday, the tone had changed. It started with a polite email from her lawyer to mine. Standard questions, clarifications, then a second, more urgent note, then a phone call. That's when the unraveling began. The marital home had been transferred, fully, irrevocably. Title shifted into a trust back in March, signed by both of us during what she believed was a mortgage simplification process. I'd even let her pick the notary. She wore a red scarf that day. I remember because the wind kept blowing it across the pen as she signed. Then came the investment accounts, not frozen, just redistributed. The ones with her name had dwindled to near nothing. The ones under the business entity were now untouchable without board consent. The board? Me and two veteran colleagues from a consulting group I'd quietly founded last year. She'd called it my old man hobby. And the pension. She'd always assumed it was the centerpiece, the prize she'd eventually leverage. But last quarter, I'd filed for restructuring under the veteran-owned small business umbrella. The pension now flowed directly into a protected distribution schedule, locked, non-contestable. By Thursday, she called. "No sugar now, no checklist. You're a goddamn snake." I didn't respond. She screamed louder. "The house? You think you can just take the house? You signed the trust documents. Page 2, under joint estate adjustments." I didn't know what I was signing. "Then maybe you should have read what you signed back in January." Dead silence, and then click. I sat in the same spot as the night before, under the garden's fading bloom. A blackbird landed on the edge of the fountain, splashing twice before lifting off. Her voice still rang in my ears, brittle and furious, but powerless. She always loved to win. At parties, during arguments, even during small errands, she needed the upper hand. It was how she kept the narrative tidy, but I'd stopped playing her game a long time ago. Winning had never interested me, only freedom. And now she was discovering the cost of underestimating quiet men. She thought she was handing me humiliation, a final blow at my retirement, backed by the applause of our children and the flash of a camera. But she'd walked into a house with no foundation, signed papers she hadn't read, mocked moves she never noticed, and now she was standing on hollow ground, wondering when the floor vanished beneath her. The truth is, I never fought her. I just removed the part of me that needed defending. The gravel crunched under her tires as she pulled into the driveway, a puff of dust trailing the back of her silver Lexus. Her heels hit the ground hard when she stepped out, like she meant to make the earth notice her. She looked up at the lake house, the wide porch, the cedar shingles we'd picked together, the wind chime she'd bought in Sedona swaying just slightly in the breeze. She reached into her purse and pulled out the familiar key, slipped it into the lock. It didn't turn. She tried again. Nothing. She stepped back, her lips parting slightly, looked up at the door. That's when she saw the note. Taped neatly to the wood, just beneath the glass panel, held in place with a single strip of blue painter's tape. She squinted, read it once, then again. Per Clause 8 of the Revocable Trust Agreement, occupancy rights expired upon spousal petition. Below that, typed in smaller font, a reference line, Trust Addendum A, page 47, signed and notarized. She stared at it for a long time. I know because the house's security system sent me the footage. Her hand hovered near the door frame like she wanted to knock. Then it balled into a fist. She looked around, maybe expecting someone to appear, me, a neighbor, a witness to share the moment with or lash out at. But the porch was empty, just the wind and the chimes. She pulled out her phone, scrolled, dialed, waited. I didn't answer. The message she left was short and sharp. Change the locks back now. I forwarded it to my attorney. He replied within minutes. Response not required. Legal occupancy void as of petition date. She hadn't remembered the clause. Of course not. Back then, she was too busy celebrating the idea of protecting our future, the language I used when I walked her through the updates over wine at the lake house's first spring. She'd laughed that night barefoot on the deck, joking about becoming professional empty nesters. I remember watching her sign the trust document while the breeze tugged gently at the tablecloth. She didn't ask about Clause 8. She didn't ask about much at all. She trusted that I hadn't changed the game because she thought she was the only one playing one, but the truth is, every detail had been laid in plain sight. That lake house had been our supposed dream, but she hadn't spent a single night there without complaining. Too quiet, too far, too much like being married to a man who'd already disappeared emotionally. Now, standing outside with nowhere to go, she finally looked like she felt the silence. She called my son next, I know because he texted me afterward. She's at the lake, not taking it well. I replied, neither did I, at first. She tried the back door, then checked the garage, then stood for a long time on the porch, staring at the note like it might change if she looked hard enough. It didn't. The lock stayed cold, the clause stayed signed, and the house, it stayed mine, not because I stole it, but because, while she was choreographing the moment she'd walk away, I was writing the terms of what she'd walk away from. She texted them both midweek. Lunch this Saturday, just us three. Feels like we haven't had a proper sit-down in forever. She even added a little heart emoji at the end, something she used to mock other women for. My daughter responded within the hour. Sorry, Mom. I've got Noah's soccer and a parent board thing after. My son took a full day, then replied, Can't, work's nuts. She waited for a follow-up, maybe a reschedule, a call, a crumb of warmth. Nothing came. She tried again Sunday. Would love to catch up, just a coffee if lunch is too much. No reply. That's when she called me. She didn't ask directly, of course. She asked if I'd said something to them, planted something, twisted the narrative. Her voice had that careful edge again, like when she used to ask, Are you sure you locked the front door? I let her speak. Then I said, I didn't tell them anything. I listened. She exhaled sharply. Listened to what? To them, over the years, to what they noticed. A long silence followed, like she was trying to remember what they could have possibly seen. They'd seen enough. Our daughter saw it, and how Deanna corrected me in front of guests. Don't say it like that, Evan. You sound so old when you use that word. Little digs, always sugar-coated. Our son saw it in car rides. When he'd mentioned something I did for him, an early loan, a call to one of my contacts, and she'd say, "Well, I was the one who pushed your dad to help," as if I needed permission to love my own kids. They'd watched her roll her eyes when I offered a compliment, heard her laugh a little too loud when friends made jokes about retirement husbands just getting in the way, none of it headline-worthy, all of it cumulative. They weren't angry with her, not openly, but they saw it. And when the envelope came out at the retirement party, when she handed me the divorce papers like it was a clever toast, they saw that too. My son called later that week, not long, just a short check-in. His voice was quiet. "I didn't cheer for the divorce," he said. "I cheered for your freedom." I sat with that for a while after we hung up. Not because I needed their loyalty, I didn't, but because for the first time in years, they weren't watching me endure something, they were watching me walk out of it. Deanna didn't understand the shift. She thought love was something you banked and withdrew. She believed she had years of motherhood capital stored with them. She didn't see that interest only builds when you give without keeping score. She tried to reframe it. Told a mutual friend that I'd alienated the kids with old man manipulation. That made it back to me, of course. Everything does eventually. But I never asked them to pick sides. I just stopped absorbing the damage. And when you stop absorbing, others start noticing who caused the bruises. She used to be the center of every plan. Every holiday, every dinner, every schedule revolved around her moods, her timing, her social calendar. But now she was sending invitations that went unanswered, trying to hold family meetings no one showed up for, talking to two adult children who were always polite, but just a little too busy. That's what happens when control evaporates. You don't hear a crash. You hear nothing. And for a woman who fed on being the nucleus of everything, that nothing was deafening. She waited until the dust settled, after the calls stopped coming, after the invitations were ignored, after even the lake house battle had gone cold. Then she made her move, confident, as always, that she still had cards to play. She filed a claim for her share of my pension, citing years of support, contributions to the household, sacrifices made for his career. Her attorney sent a thick packet full of references to precedents and percentages. It was polished, aggressive, dressed in legalese like armor. They expected negotiation. What they got was a single-page reply. Mr. Danner's post-divorce financial assets are held under a legally protected, veteran-owned small business trust. Pursuant to Title 38 U.S. Code Paragraph 8127, all distributions are exclusive to the named trustee and non-transferable. That was it. No offer, no counter. Just a locked door and a key she didn't hold. She'd laughed at the fund when I first formed it. "You and your buddies pretending to be CEOs of a shell company," she once said at a dinner party. "Just say you wanted an excuse to get matching polos and drink beer in a shared office." Everyone laughed. I smiled too. Let her have the moment. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that the fund wasn't for beer or nostalgia. It was structure, defense. Every consulting contract I picked up after stepping back from the firm went through it. Every equity piece, every bonus. And then, finally, the pension. We'd built a whole false narrative around the slow fade into retirement. She helped me sell it. She thought I was winding down. I was just narrowing the aperture. When her lawyer called mine for clarification, he got no apology, no loophole, no offer to compromise, just a reiteration of the statute and the trust terms. His reply email was curt. "Your client appears to have misunderstood the irrevocable nature of the fund." She tried again, filed a motion, cited unfair distribution, deliberate concealment, even hinted at fraud. The judge reviewed the documents and denied the motion in under 48 hours. All signatories informed, no material omissions, protective structuring within legal scope. Her lawyer called her that night, apparently, and told her it was over. I didn't hear her scream this time, but I imagine she did. Because this wasn't just money. It was narrative. For years, she'd held the unspoken belief that no matter what cracks formed between us, she'd walk away with half of what I built, that it was hers by proximity, that my work, my endurance, my late nights and early mornings were joint property by default. But you can't divide what no longer exists on paper. You can't claim a share of something that lives outside your reach. She didn't understand the fun because she never looked past the surface. All she saw was a vanity project, a retirement distraction. She missed the meetings, the board structure, the quarterly filings, the insurance clause that tied it all together. She mocked what she didn't respect. And now, it was the very thing that blocked her at every turn. She told a friend of ours, someone mutual from the club, that I'd hoarded assets out of spite. The friend called me later, trying to stay neutral, asking if there was any truth to it. I answered calmly, "No, I protected what was mine. She just assumed I wouldn't." The call ended in a quiet, uncomfortable pause. I've learned those silences mean people are recalculating what they thought they knew. And Deanna, she wasn't just shut out financially. She was something far worse. She was irrelevant to the system now. The message came in late, one of those grainy, compressed images forwarded through group chats and mutual circles. A photo of a gallery wall, soft white lighting, framed pieces arranged in quiet symmetry, and in the center of it, beneath a canvas print of a still lake at dawn, I stood with my hands loosely folded behind my back, reading the caption, "Freedom isn't escape, it's clarity." She zoomed in. My hair had more silver now, but it looked intentional, trimmed, clean. My posture was straighter. I wore a charcoal jacket, not expensive but tailored, and a navy shirt with no tie. I looked like someone who had nowhere to be and liked it that way. She stared at the photo for a long time. No one had told her I was part of the exhibit. It was a local thing, veteran-owned businesses sponsoring a small collection of photographic essays on solitude and healing. The lake in the photo wasn't ours, not the one she tried to claim. This one was smaller, quieter. I'd found it on a solo trip in August and took the photo myself. But a friend of hers, an old acquaintance from the PTA days, sent the image with a casual, "Just saw this at the community center, isn't that Evan?" She didn't reply right away, but she showed up 3 days later, quietly. Walked the gallery with sunglasses perched on her head, even though the room was dim. Paused in front of the photo, looked at me, captured in stillness, and tried to reconcile it with the man she used to nudge out of the way in doorways, finish sentences for, correct in public. Someone beside her asked, "Is that your ex?" She didn't speak at first, just stared. Then finally, "Yeah, that's him." No smile, no bitterness, just a flat admission of something she couldn't undo. I wasn't in the background anymore. I wasn't fading in a cardigan on some porch, muttering about regrets. I looked like someone who had chosen intentionally not to circle back, not to rewrite, explain, or cling. That's the part that undid her, not the photo, not the caption, the stillness. The fact that I didn't look back, that I hadn't left for someone else, or to chase some cliche, or to punish her. I had simply stepped out of the story she was trying to keep writing. She lingered at the exhibit, longer than she meant to. People walked around her. A few nodded politely. No one recognized her as Mrs. Danner. That title didn't live there anymore. She read the small blurb under the photo. Taken by Evan Danner, former engineer, now working with veteran outreach programs focused on reinvention after service. She hadn't known that. Not the outreach, not the exhibits, not the reinvention. She thought she'd buried the old version of me. She didn't realize I'd already buried him myself, not out of sadness, out of clarity, because sometimes the cleanest exit isn't slamming the door. It's walking so far away from the house that you forget what the hinges sounded like. The call came at 11:42 a.m., just after she'd finished paying for a manicure. The unknown number. She almost ignored it, thumb hovering over decline, but something made her answer. "Ms. Danner?" the voice asked. Professional, male, slightly rushed. "Yes. This is compliance outreach for the Keystone Research Grant audit. We're confirming your official release from co-liability regarding the fraud investigation." She blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your name was initially attached to the proposal due to marital co-signature eligibility. However, Mr. Danner removed your authorization before final submission. You were not listed on the final agreement. Your liability is 0. A pause. Then, "You're clear." The line went dead. She stood frozen, phone still against her ear, the nail technician asking something about topcoat. But Deanna didn't answer. She dropped the phone into her purse like it burned. She hadn't even known there was a Keystone grant. She hadn't signed anything, not knowingly, yet somehow her name had almost been on a multi-million-dollar federal research grant flagged for internal irregularities. She wouldn't have understood the red flags if she tried, but the word fraud echoed in her head like a siren. She drove home without the radio on. At her desk, she pulled up old folders, emails, files Evan used to forward her with generic subject lines like Doc Review or FYI, Your Eyes Only, ones she barely glanced at back then. She found one from 9 months ago. Boring title. Inside, a PDF labeled Grant Preliminary Authorizations. Her name was typed beneath his. And then, in the final version, gone. No trace. He'd taken her name off. No confrontation, no ask, no show of superiority. Just a quiet redaction. She stared at the screen, fingers cold on the trackpad. She tried to convince herself it was self-serving, that he'd removed her for some financial leverage or liability shielding. But then she opened another document, one buried deep in a folder marked VOB Strategy. There, in plain text, was the clause, in cases of federal inquiry, any co-signee listed as non-participatory spouse remains equally liable under the False Claims Act unless explicitly removed prior to submission. She hadn't known, but he had. Evan, who hadn't spoken to her in months, who hadn't returned a single call or message since the gallery, who could have let her hang herself with a clause she never saw and walked away untouched. Instead, he protected her from it. She sat back in the chair, chest hollow. It wasn't gratitude that rose in her. It wasn't even guilt. It was something worse, because this man she'd tried to paint as emotionally absent, cold, calculated, he had quietly shielded her from something she didn't even know was coming. Not for thanks, not for leverage, just because it needed to be done. She hadn't seen it happen, and now she'd never get the moment back. No stage to show humility, no conversation where she could redeem herself. He didn't need credit. He didn't need her recognition. He had already moved on, and that, more than anything, was the part she couldn't reconcile. She had expected revenge. What she got was a grace so complete it shamed her. She heard the knock just after noon, 2 short taps, and a thud of something being set down. She opened the front door to find a plain, unmarked box on the welcome mat. No return address, no label except her name, handwritten, in sharp, even lettering. She stared at it for a long time before bringing it inside. It wasn't heavy, just dense in a way that made her hands ache as she carried it to the kitchen counter. She opened it slowly, peeled back the folded brown paper, and froze. Right on top, a crisp manila folder, labeled in familiar font. She opened it. Inside was the prenuptial amendment they'd signed during their anniversary weekend at that quiet spa in Carmel Valley, the one she'd insisted on calling a reset trip. He'd framed it like a romantic gesture, updating their documents just in case. She hadn't read it closely. The wine had been good, the fireplace warm, and he'd been unusually tender that night. Her signature was there. So was his. Page 9, a clause confirming that in the event of divorce, any shared real estate and retirement-linked assets defaulted to the party with operational ownership, his LLC. She closed the folder carefully, setting it aside like it might shatter. Beneath it, a photo, their wedding day. She remembered that image well, taken outside the old courthouse, a grainy black and white she used to keep on her desk. But this version was altered. His half was cleanly folded inward, creased with precision. All that remained was her, smiling toward a man now vanished from the frame. She stared at it, as if willing the rest of the image to reappear. Then she saw the sticky note, a single square of yellow, written in the same steady handwriting as the box label. You taught me silence. I used it well. Her knees nearly gave. She slid down the side of the counter to the cold tile floor, the box open beside her like a time capsule of all the things she'd ignored, every quiet moment, every nod, every deflection that she once took as weakness. Each had been a choice. She sat there for hours, not crying, just sitting, holding the folded photo, reading the line again and again, a sentence that didn't gloat, didn't accuse, just told the truth. He had never argued, never fought to prove himself, never asked for applause. He had let her perform. while he took notes, and now she understood what those small, unreadable smiles really meant all those years, what those long pauses at dinner were, why he'd never raised his voice even when she mocked or dismissed. He was learning, practicing, rehearsing for a silence that would one day speak louder than anything she could say. And when it finally did, it arrived in a simple box. No drama, no courtrooms, no speeches, just the final footnote to a marriage she thought she had authored alone, but he'd been writing too, in margins, and she never bothered to read them. The folding chairs were mostly filled, older veterans in baseball caps, young ones in plain t-shirts, a few spouses taking notes in the back. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the projector threw my presentation onto the white wall behind me. Beyond survival, building stability after service. It was my third time giving the lecture this quarter. The rhythm came easy now. I spoke calmly, clearly, not from a script, just experience. Trust structures, lean operations, quiet ownership, long-term plays over short-term noise, nothing flashy, just foundations that didn't crack under pressure. Somewhere around minute 30, as I stepped aside for a question from the front row, I saw her. Back wall. Standing just inside the doorway, arms folded. Deanna, hair pulled back. Dark coat, not dressed to blend in, but not to stand out either. Just there. I didn't pause, didn't flinch. We locked eyes for maybe 2 seconds, that was all. No nod, no smile, nothing to misread, just recognition. And then I went back to the chart on screen. Compound gains in a veteran-owned S-Corp structure. The room stayed focused, she didn't. 5 minutes later, when I glanced up again, she was gone. No sound of heels, no door creak, just gone. She left before the applause, before the handshake line, before the casual thank yous from people who'd found something solid in what I said. I stayed. Afterward, one of the organizers handed me a donation envelope and asked if I'd be willing to keynote their fall seminar. People listen when it's lived in, she said. I nodded once. Outside, the air was cool, the kind that makes you think of October even when it's still September. I walked the long way to the truck, no rush. The truth was simple. I hadn't disappeared. I hadn't escaped. I hadn't even reinvented myself. I had just stopped explaining, stopped softening, stopped standing still while someone else filled in my silence with whatever version suited them. She used to say I was impossible to read, that I held too much in, that I should be a man and stop asking. So I did. I stopped asking. And when the time came, I didn't raise my voice or slam a door or prove anything. I just kept walking. She stood there today expecting some thread still hanging between us, but that thread burned months ago, not in a blaze, in silence, because closure isn't something you demand from another person. It's the moment you realize you never needed their permission to leave and never needed their voice to define your own.